The dental drill was already buzzing when Elena noticed the blood on the sterile tray was completely dry. Elena froze in the leather dental chair, her fingers digging into the cold chrome armrests as Dr. Robert Vance casually tossed a bloody piece of gauze into the metal trash bin, humming a cheerful tune that jarred violently against the sterile smell of antiseptic. He turned to her with a warm, professional smile, wiped his gloved hands on a paper towel, and asked her how the throbbing pain in her lower right molar had been since yesterday's extraction. Elena felt a cold drop of sweat trace her spine. Her breath caught in her throat as she forced the words past her dry lips to tell him this was her very first time in his clinic, her very first appointment in this entire city, and that her tooth was completely fine. Dr. Vance stopped humming instantly. The smile vanished from his face as he slowly walked over to the reception computer, tapped the mouse, and spun the monitor toward her to reveal her own digital medical chart stamped with yesterday's date, complete with a detailed digital signature. A completed procedure code for tooth number 30, and a high-resolution X-ray showing an empty socket in her lower right jaw. Elena stared at the screen in absolute horror. Her heart hammered against her ribs because yesterday she had been 300 miles away in Maine, attending her father's funeral, standing beside a quiet casket, while her husband stood silently behind her. Yet here was undeniable digital proof that she had spent yesterday afternoon sitting right in this chair. Dr. Vance leaned in close, his voice dropping to a calm, concerned whisper, and asked her why she was saying she had never been here when her own signature and credit card receipt from yesterday afternoon were already logged in the system. Elena scrambled out of the chair, her mind racing as she tried to understand how her bank account could show a transaction she never made while she was miles away burying her father. Dr. Vance didn't chase her. He just watched her with deep, clinical concern, asking if she was feeling confused or if her husband needed to be called. Elena bolted out of the treatment room and ran into the narrow hallway. She nearly collided with a nurse carrying a fresh tray of instruments, but the nurse gave her a warm, familiar smile and asked if she needed a glass of water for the dizziness she had complained about yesterday. Elena grabbed the nurse by the sleeve, demanding to know who else had been in this room yesterday. The nurse only blinked in genuine confusion, asking why Elena was acting as if she hadn't come in alone at 3 p.m. Elena fled the clinic into the harsh afternoon sunlight, her hands shaking so violently she dropped her car keys onto the pavement. As she bent down to retrieve them, she noticed a parking stub tucked under her windshield wiper, stamped with yesterday's date and the exact license plate number of her sedan. She stared at the little piece of paper in absolute disbelief. How could her car be parked in this exact spot 24 hours before she had even driven into the city? Elena sat in her idling car, staring at the parking stub while her breathing slowly evened out. She was 34 years old, an illustrator whose life was meticulously organized. She drew detailed botanical illustrations for textbooks, finding comfort in precise lines and clear facts. She kept a physical journal where she logged every daily task, every grocery purchase, and every doctor appointment. She did this because for years she had suffered from severe anxiety and occasional sleepwalking, and keeping meticulous records gave her a sense of control. She trusted her journal above everything else. She opened her purse, pulled out her small leather notebook, and flipped back to yesterday's page. Written in her own neat handwriting were the words, 10 a.m., Father's funeral service, Portland, 2 p.m., drive back home with Mark. There was no entry for a dentist appointment. There was no entry for a 300-mile trip across state lines in the middle of the afternoon, yet her phone's banking app confirmed a payment to Dr. Vance's clinic for $350, posted yesterday at 3:15 p.m. Her mind reeled. Either the world was collapsing into pure madness, or someone was intentionally stealing her identity, her money, and her life, and if someone was pretending to be her, they knew every detail of her personal routine. Elena drove straight home with white knuckles gripping the steering wheel. She needed Mark. Mark was her anchor. They had been married for 9 years, and his sensible, calm nature had always protected her whenever her anxiety spun out of control. Mark worked as a senior auditor at a local accounting firm. He was meticulous, logical, and deeply caring. When she pulled into the driveway of their 2-story suburban home, she noticed Mark's sedan parked neatly in the garage. He had taken the day off to help her settle in after the funeral trip. She hurried up the front steps, desperate to throw her arms around him and explain the bizarre nightmare at the clinic. But as she unlocked the front door, she heard voices coming from the kitchen down the hall. A light, familiar laughter echoed off the hardwood floor, a woman's laugh. Elena froze in the entry hall. She stepped softly across the rug and peered around the doorway into the kitchen. Standing by the marble island was a woman with dark hair, cut in the exact same shoulder-length bob as Elena's. She was wearing Elena's favorite blue cashmere sweater. Mark was standing behind her, his arms wrapped gently around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder as she poured 2 cups of coffee. Elena felt the air leave her lungs. The woman turned her head slightly to smile at Mark, and Elena caught her breath in total terror. The woman's side profile, her jawline, her cheekbones, she looked identical to Elena. It was like looking into a distorted mirror. Mark squeezed the woman's shoulder affectionately, whispering that he was glad she was feeling better today after her dental work. Elena pushed the kitchen door open with a sharp creak. Mark spun around, his face draining of color the moment his eyes landed on Elena standing in the doorway. The woman at the counter set her coffee cup down with a soft click and stared at Elena with wide, startled eyes. For a long, excruciating 10 seconds, nobody spoke. "Elena?" Mark stammered, his voice cracking as he took a step forward, looking back and forth between Elena and the stranger standing by the island. Why are you back so early? Who is she, Mark?" Elena gasped, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. She pointed a shaking finger at the woman wearing her clothes. "Why is she in our house? Why is she wearing my sweater? Why did she go to my dentist yesterday using my name?" The stranger stepped out from behind the counter. Up close, the resemblance was uncanny, yet subtle differences emerged under the bright kitchen lights. The woman was slightly thinner, her skin paler, and her posture stiffer, but her face, her eyes, her lips, her nose was an unmistakable match. "Elena, please, calm down," Mark said, holding his hands up in a soothing gesture as he moved between the 2 women. "Let me explain. You weren't supposed to see this yet. You were supposed to be resting." "Explain what?" Elena shouted, tears spilling down her cheeks. "That you have another woman living here, that she's using my credit card and my name. Is this who went to the dentist yesterday while I was in Maine?" Mark looked down at the floor, exhaling a heavy, exhausted sigh. He looked older, worn out, with deep, dark circles under his eyes that Elena hadn't noticed before. He looked at Elena with profound sadness, not anger or malice. "Elena," Mark said softly, his voice trembling, "you didn't go to Maine yesterday. Your father didn't die yesterday. Your father passed away 6 months ago." The room went dead silent. The words hung in the air like a heavy weight, crushing the room's atmosphere. Elena stared at him, shaking her head in violent denial. "That's a lie. That's an absolute lie. I was just there. I wore my black coat." "You stood right next to me at the cemetery." "Mark, show her," the other woman said quietly. Her voice was softer than Elena's, carrying a gentle, melancholic cadence. She looked at Elena not with malice, but with deep, heartbreaking pity. Mark walked slowly over to the kitchen desk, unlocked the top drawer, and pulled out a framed photograph along with a folder of medical documents. He placed them gently on the island table. Elena stepped forward, her hand shaking so violently she could barely lift the frame. In the photograph was her father, sitting in a wheelchair at a local nursing facility, holding a birthday sign dated 8 months ago. Next to it was an official death certificate from the State Department of Health, clearly bearing her father's name and a date of death from 6 months prior. No, this is impossible," Elena whispered, her head spinning. "I have my journal. I wrote down the funeral steps yesterday." She pulled her journal out of her bag and slammed it onto the counter, flipping the pages frantically to show Mark the entry from yesterday morning. But as she stared down at the page, her heart stopped. The handwriting on yesterday's entry wasn't neat and precise like her usual script. It was jagged, frantic, pressed so hard into the paper that the pen had torn through the page in several places. The entry didn't just mention the funeral. It repeated the same sentence over and over in scrolled lines. "Must go to Portland. Must see father. Must go to Portland." "Elena?" Mark said, taking a cautious step closer and gently placing his hand over hers. You've been suffering from severe memory lapses and fugue states ever since your twin sister Clara came back into our lives 3 months ago. You have good days where you are completely lucid, and then you have days where your mind resets to old memories, old traumas, and fabricated events. Elena pulled her hand back as if she had been burned. Twin sister? I don't have a twin sister. I am an only child. The stranger took a step forward, her eyes gleaming with unshed tears. Elena, it's me. It's Clara. I know you don't remember me right now. You blocked me out after our family split up 20 years ago, when Mom took me to Canada and Dad kept you here. You were only 14. When I came back to find you 3 months ago, the shock of meeting me after all those years triggered a massive psychological breakdown. Elena backed away until her spine hit the kitchen wall. Her mind was a chaotic storm of conflicting reality and terrifying doubt. 2 stories were standing before her. In one story, her devoted husband and a long-lost twin sister were trying to care for her through a devastating mental collapse. In the other story, her husband was working with a look-alike stranger to gaslight her, steal her identity, and make her believe she was insane. Every clue from the morning suddenly had 2 entirely different interpretations. Dr. Vance's clinic had her records because she had actually gone there yesterday during a confused state, or because Clara had gone there using her identity. The credit card charge was real because she had paid for it, or because Clara had used her card. The parking stub was at the clinic because her car had been driven there yesterday, either by Elena in a trance or by Clara using her spare key. If I have a twin sister, Elena said, her voice dropping to a whisper as she fought to keep her composure. Why is there not a single photo of her in this house? Why isn't she mentioned in my journal before 3 months ago? Why are you wearing my sweater, Clara? Because you react with extreme violence whenever you see proof of me when you're in one of your episodes, Clara said gently. You burned all the childhood photos 2 months ago during a panic attack. I wear your clothes because when I moved into the guest house to help Mark take care of you, you insisted that I look like you so you wouldn't feel frightened by a stranger in the house. That makes no sense, Elena shouted. Mark, call the police right now. If she's my sister, let the police verify her ID. Let a real doctor come here. Mark looked at her with profound sorrow. Elena, the police have already been here. 2 weeks ago, when you locked yourself in the attic, believing I was an intruder, the officers know about your condition. Your psychiatrist, Dr. Miller, signed the formal care orders. Then call Dr. Miller, Elena demanded. Bring him here. Dr. Miller is on his way, Mark said quietly. I called him 10 minutes ago when I realized you hadn't come home from your walk. Elena looked at Mark, then at Clara. Their expressions were synchronized, calm, patient, deeply sorrowful. It was the exact look people give to someone who is terminally ill. For a fleeting second, Elena felt a chilling wave of self-doubt. What if her entire life was a lie? What if her meticulous journals were just the frantic scribblings of a deteriorating mind? What if she truly was sick? She looked down at her hands. Her knuckles were pale. She looked at the kitchen table, at her journal, at the coffee cups. And then her eyes caught something on the side counter near the microwave. Something small, bright, and completely out of place. It was a small plastic prescription bottle from a local pharmacy. Elena's keen illustrator's eye, trained to spot the smallest visual details, immediately caught the text printed on the white label. The prescription was for a powerful sedative called donepezil, used to treat cognitive impairment and severe memory confusion. The name on the prescription bottle was Elena Vance, but the date the prescription had been filled was yesterday afternoon at 4 p.m., an hour after the dental appointment. And right next to the pill bottle sat a small black leather wallet that was identical to Elena's wallet. Elena's heart began to beat with cold, sharp clarity. She didn't make a scene. She didn't scream. She took a slow, deep breath, forcing her face into a mask of exhaustion and defeat. I'm tired, Mark, Elena said softly, wrapping her arms around herself. My head hurts so much. I think I need to sit down in the living room while we wait for Dr. Miller. Mark's face visibly relaxed. A massive wave of relief swept over his features. Of course, sweetheart. Go sit on the sofa. Clara, make her a warm cup of tea. Clara smiled warmly, a tender, sisterly smile. I'll bring it right in, Elena. Elena turned slowly and walked into the living room. As soon as Mark and Clara turned their backs to fill the kettle in the kitchen, Elena moved with silent, lightning speed. She didn't go to the sofa. She slipped into Mark's home office across the hall and closed the door without letting the latch click. She needed physical evidence, unbiased, unalterable physical evidence. She ran to Mark's heavy mahogany desk. She knew Mark was a creature of habit. He kept all important household legal documents, tax filings, and insurance policies in the bottom fireproof drawer of his desk. The key was always hidden inside a brass pen holder on the desktop. Elena grabbed the key, unlocked the bottom drawer, and began pulling out the thick, color-coded folders. If Clara was her twin sister, who had lived in Canada for 20 years, there would be legal records, a birth certificate showing a twin birth, immigration papers, or a guest house lease. Elena pulled out the folder labeled Family Records. She flipped through the yellowed paper documents. She found her own birth certificate from the Portland Memorial Hospital. She stared at the paper. It listed a single live birth, Elena Rose Vance. There was no mention of a second child. There was no twin. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She kept digging. She pulled out the folder labeled Medical and Insurance. Inside was a recent life insurance policy updated just 4 months ago. Elena scanned the pages, her eyes skipping past the legal jargon until she reached the beneficiary clause and the policy payout amount. The policy was a $2 million primary life insurance plan on Elena Vance. But 6 months ago, right after her father had actually passed away and left Elena his substantial real estate, Mark had filed an amendment to the policy. Attached to the back of the policy was a psychiatric guardianship application seeking full legal and financial control over Elena Vance's estate due to severe neurological incapacity. Attached to the guardianship form was a medical evaluation signed not by a renowned state hospital but by a private clinic. And stapled to the back of that document was a copy of a driver's license application filed 3 months ago in a neighboring state. Elena stared at the photo on the driver's license application. It was the woman in the kitchen. But the name printed beneath the photo was not Clara Vance. The name on the license was Rachel Vance, formerly Rachel Cole. Elena's breath hitched. She pulled out a small stack of bank records hidden at the very back of the drawer. They were financial statements from an offshore account held jointly by Mark Vance and Rachel Cole. The account had been opened 3 years ago. 3 years ago, while Elena believed she was living in a happy, quiet marriage, Mark had been maintaining a completely secret relationship with another woman. The truth began to unfurl in Elena's mind with terrifying, undeniable clarity. There was no long-lost twin sister. There was no sudden onset of a mystical genetic fugue state. Mark hadn't just been cheating on her. He had spent the last 6 months orchestrating a deliberate, methodical campaign to destroy her sanity. After her father died 6 months ago and left Elena a massive estate worth millions, Mark and his longtime lover, Rachel, saw their opportunity. Rachel, who bore a striking natural resemblance to Elena, had undergone subtle cosmetic adjustments, styling her hair and makeup to perfectly match Elena's appearance. They had been drugging Elena's food and morning coffee with heavy doses of memory-altering sedatives, the very pills sitting by the microwave, causing her to experience genuine disorientation, blackout periods, and lost time. While Elena was drugged or sleeping off the heavy medication, Rachel would step into her life. Rachel drove Elena's car. Rachel used Elena's credit cards. Rachel signed Elena's name at local businesses, including Dr. Vance's dental office yesterday afternoon, intentionally creating a flawless digital and physical paper trail that showed Elena acting erratically, making appointments she wouldn't remember, and visiting places while claiming to be elsewhere. Yesterday, while Elena was out cold in her bed from a spiked morning drink, believing in her drugged hallucination that she was attending her father's funeral in Maine, Rachel had taken Elena's car, driven to Dr. Vance's office, had a molar extracted under Elena's name, paid with Elena's card, and parked in the clinic lot. They were building an unassailable legal case of severe dementia and dissociative mental illness so that Mark could have Elena legally declared incompetent, commit her permanently to a private psychiatric institution, and assume total control of her millions. The dental appointment yesterday hadn't been a glitch or a mistake. It had been the final piece of evidence Mark needed to prove to a judge that Elena was completely out of touch with reality. A cold drop of sweat rolled down Elena's cheek. The horror of her situation was absolute. Her husband wasn't protecting her. He was her jailer. The woman in the kitchen wasn't a sister. She was an intruder stealing her life piece by piece. And worst of all, everyone in town, the dentist, the nurse, the local pharmacy, genuinely believed Elena was losing her mind because Mark and Rachel had engineered the evidence to make it look undeniable. Suddenly, the office door clicked open. Elena whipped her head around. Mark was standing in the doorway, holding a steaming mug of tea. The gentle, sorrowful expression was gone from his face. His eyes were cold, sharp, and calculating as he looked down at the open fireproof drawer and the documents scattered across the desk. "You always were too smart for your own good, Elena," Mark said quietly, setting the mug down on the bookshelf near the door. He didn't sound angry. He sounded disappointed, like an auditor who had found a flaw in a spreadsheet. "If you had just taken the medicine, you would have slipped away peacefully into a quiet facility where you'd be cared for. You wouldn't have felt any pain." "You monster," Elena whispered, standing up and backing toward the window behind the desk. "You've been drugging me. You brought her into my house. You faked my records." "I didn't fake anything," Mark said calmly, taking a step into the room and blocking the doorway. "The dental records are real. The credit card receipts are real. The doctor's signatures are real. If you call the police right now, who do you think they're going to believe? A woman with a documented history of severe anxiety, whose signature is on every medical evaluation, or her loving husband, who has spent months documenting her sad, tragic decline?" Rachel appeared in the doorway behind Mark, watching Elena with that same cold, detached expression. "It's over, Elena," Rachel said softly. "The guardianship papers were finalized this morning. Dr. Miller isn't coming here to evaluate you. He's coming with a medical transport team to take you to the Fairview Rest Facility. You signed the consent forms yourself 3 weeks ago, after Mark put them in front of you while you were under the sedatives." Elena looked at the two of them. She felt a wave of cold panic rise in her chest, but deep within her, beneath the fear, a hard spark of anger ignited. For months, she had blamed herself. She had suffered through agonized nights, believing her mind was broken, feeling guilty for burdening her husband with her fragile mental health. Knowing the truth, knowing that her mind was sound, and that the madness was a calculated attack, didn't break her. It set her free. "I might be drugged, Mark," Elena said, her voice steady and clear, "but I'm not stupid." Elena grabbed the heavy brass pen holder off the desk and threw it with all her strength straight through the glass window behind her. The window shattered with a deafening crash, showering glass onto the patio outside. Mark lunged forward with a curse, but Elena didn't try to fight him. She grabbed the folder containing the birth certificate, the life insurance policy, and Rachel's real driver's license, tucked it under her arm, and dove straight through the broken window frame onto the lawn below. Glass scraped her arms, but she barely felt the sting. She scrambled to her feet and ran as fast as she could toward the street. Behind her, she heard Mark shouting to Rachel to grab the car keys. Elena didn't run down the driveway. She ran straight across the front yard toward her neighbor's house, the house of Mr. Henderson, an 80-year-old retired state judge who had lived next door for 30 years. Mr. Henderson knew her father. He knew Elena since she was a child. Elena burst onto Mr. Henderson's front porch and pounded frantically on the heavy wooden door. "Mr. Henderson, please! Call the state police! Help me!" The front door opened, and the tall, silver-haired retired judge stepped out, his eyes widening in alarm as he saw Elena covered in glass dust, holding a thick file of papers to her chest. "Elena! Good God, child, what happened? Mr. Henderson exclaimed, reaching out to support her trembling shoulders. "Mark, he's been drugging me," Elena gasped, her chest heaving as tears of relief finally streamed down her face. "He brought a woman into my house to impersonate me. They forged guardianship papers. Look at these files. Look at the insurance policies." Mark came running down the sidewalk, his hands up, putting on his best frantic, concerned husband voice. "Mr. Henderson, thank God. Please, hold her. She's having a severe psychotic break. She jumped through the office window. She needs her medication. Mr. Henderson looked at Mark, then down at Elena, and then at the official documents Elena thrust into his hands. As a former judge, Mr. Henderson's eyes immediately caught the state seal on the original birth certificate, the contradictory dates on the insurance policy, and the picture of Rachel Cole. Mr. Henderson stepped in front of Elena, placing himself firmly between her and Mark. His voice was like thunder. "Stay right where you are, Mark." "Mr. Henderson, you don't understand. She's sick." "I said stay where you are," Mr. Henderson commanded, pulling his cell phone from his pocket with his free hand. "I've known this girl since she was 10 years old. I know her father's estate details, and I know how to read a legal document. I'm calling the state police captain directly right now, and nobody is leaving this driveway until they arrive." Mark stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at Mr. Henderson's unwavering posture, looked at the documents in the old judge's hands, and then looked back at Rachel, who had just walked out onto the porch of their house. The elaborate illusion, built on quiet lies, spiked drinks, and manipulated records, crumbled in a single instant under the cold, impartial glare of an outside witness. 2 hours later, the driveway was filled with state police cruisers. The state investigators didn't take Mark's word for anything. They searched the house and found the hidden supply of unlicensed sedatives, the duplicate credit cards, and Rachel Cole's actual legal identification hidden in the guest house. When questioned by state detectives away from Mark's influence, Rachel quickly broke down, confessing to the entire plot in exchange for a plea deal, admitting that Mark had planned the scheme after Elena's father died to seize the multi-million-dollar inheritance. Dr. Vance's dental clinic was cleared of any wrongdoing. The dentist and his staff had been genuine victims of Rachel's deception, fully believing they were treating Elena Vance because Rachel had presented Elena's real driver's license and credit cards. Sitting in the back of an ambulance, while a gentle paramedic wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and cleaned the small scratches on her arms, Elena looked out at the quiet suburban street. She watched as Mark and Rachel were led away in handcuffs by state troopers, their faces pale and silent under the flashing red and blue lights. The fog that had clouded Elena's mind for months was finally lifting. She felt a profound, deep grief for the betrayal by the man she had loved for nearly a decade. But beneath the grief was a solid, unbreakable foundation of truth. Her memory was not her enemy. Her mind had not broken. She had been fought, poisoned, and deceived, but she had ultimately survived by trusting her own eyes and seeking the truth. The greatest danger we face is not when others try to deceive us, but when we allow fear to make us doubt our own truth. For a clear mind and a brave heart can shatter even the most carefully constructed lie.